Hello and welcome to another episode of TFT on Two Wheels. As always, I'm your host Mike. Today's episode, Compassion, as part of the BLC 16 Keynote on Empathy series. Okay, well hello everyone. And if you watched the last video on perspective, you'll remember that I was on the freeway in the middle of Pennsylvania headed to Boston for BLC. You might be wondering why the second video in the series of the Boston trip is now being filmed on some beautiful fall country roads in Ohio. So here's what this genius tech guy did. Somewhere between my video camera and my computer and iMovie and YouTube, I completely deleted all my footage. Just of this part. I think I was in one of those crazy fits where you delete everything from your desktop because you just have so much clutter you don't know what to do with yourself. So I had to refilm it, or I am refilming it right now, I should say. But nonetheless, same material, more beautifuler outside. Look, even that yellow truck fits in with all the trees. Color's starting to change. So after perspective, and before you reach that stage of empathy, there's this middle ground, I think, and I've labeled it compassion, or I say it's the compassion level. But it's not just compassion. I mean, compassion is one of those loaded words. It comes with a set of personal beliefs and feelings when you hear someone say something about being compassionate. Let's talk a little bit about what I mean by this. So compassion is a pretty natural thing for teachers, to be compassionate towards our kids, towards our students. You want that emotional connection, and it is about that. It's about the emotional connection we have with our students. So if you remember the perspective part of the overview, to me, and I think in general, to really comprehend empathy, you have to be able to separate that emotional piece from it. When you look at a tried and true definition of mindfulness, and this ability to understand everything around you, a lot of times you'll read that definition and it will say that you have to separate out the emotional piece. That this is, not looking at things around you and judging and giving it an emotional characteristic, but just knowing it's there. So when teachers gain that perspective and we start to have compassion for our students in their lives, that can be a very good and a very bad thing. If it means that we connect more with them on an interpersonal level, that we're more involved in what goes on with them as students beyond what's happening with them in our classroom, then I think that's a good thing, But we don't want compassion to drive too much of our decision making from a curricular or a methodological standpoint. You don't want to eliminate homework because you have compassion for how busy your students' lives are, because that could negatively affect their learning. Just because you're compassionate to their busy lives doesn't mean you should start excluding things from them. That's not going to make them less busy. It's probably not going to change how much they do in class for you. Okay, so you have to think about where these ideas and concepts are coming from. And only then can we start to see how compassion works and doesn't work. Now, compassion's also tricky when you think about what that emotional piece means. If you really want to dig into some Buddhist teachings, and I'm sure someone will ding me for this, the idea of elimination of suffering. So the word suffering can mean a lot of different things, and I don't know if it's really truly defined what the great Buddha meant by suffering, okay? But suffering is an emotional connection, whether it's jealousy or longing for things that your neighbor has, right? If we look at the Christian interpretations. Compassion's in that role. Because when we're compassionate for our students, a lot of times it's going to bring on some personal suffering. And again, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I've had a share, and I'll talk about it in a second. But it influences how we help those students learn and how we participate in the learning process. So the world of empathy and compassion, you're going to jump between those a lot. I really don't think that you're always an empathetic teacher, nor do I think you should be. It's like great leadership. Sometimes you have to be that coach, that visionary, and sometimes you just have to be a commanding pace setter. You just have to get things done and tell people what's happening, right? So I do think that compassion is important in education. Definitely. We are all people. At the end of the day, life is just one big social experiment, And what we make of that socialness, what we make of the emotional connections we have with people, are pretty important to affecting everything else we do in our lives. And I want to talk a little bit about how compassion has been detrimental to my career. So I was always a very compassionate teacher, an empathetic teacher. I worked very hard to become that and to stay that way. But sometimes events happen that challenge your ability to not be compassionate. February 27th of 2012, a student of Chardon Local Schools came into the high school and murdered 3 students, 2 of which I had previously, and also injured several others. This shooting changed our school district. Okay, now I was a middle school teacher, not a high school teacher, don't get me wrong. My issues are probably different than those people in the building. But that changed. That changed what it meant to come back to school. That changed what it meant to me to be a teacher or to be in these students' lives. The emotional tolls were crazy. I don't know if you can ever put your finger on it. I'm sure that I probably should have went to counseling or still can. But there's, I don't want to say emotional damage, but it changes you emotionally. It's very hard for me to read or hear or listen to shootings in other schools or acts of violence. It instills in me an emotional response, I think, much different than other people. Not that that's good or bad, but it makes it hard to function. And at the end of the day, what that meant for me was my compassion for my students started to hinder my ability to be a good teacher. I lost something in my teaching after that day. And I really only lasted in Chardon for another year and 2 months, something like that. Because I couldn't get out of that compassionate rut. I saw these kids' lives and I saw how they were changing, and it was hard for me to do anything educationally. It really was. Anything demanding or pushing. Like, I felt like, how can I do this to my kids? Especially those students I was in actual lockdown with. There was a strange emotional connectedness to that. And I'm sure I'm not the only teacher that'll tell you that. And even with their parents. I mean, Chardon was a small enough town, and I had worked other jobs in the city enough to know a lot of the people there already. So you take on top of that my 7-8 years of teaching, and I think it was 10 years that I worked in a business in the community. I really, I don't know. It just changes you. And while there were a lot of reasons I left the classroom, that was a very large one. A great opportunity presented itself to do great work that was right where my philosophical brain was at the time. So that was a godsend to find something that I really did want to do and I really did want to jump into. Did I want to leave the school year in October? No. Did I want to leave on those kinds of terms? No. But emotionally, I really don't think there was another choice for me. That was just unfortunately where I was at. So I jumped on it. It led to great things, and it was the right decision. So compassion, while it is important, I know this is kind of a pessimistic TFT on 2 wheels, but I really do want to warn people that this leading with your heart or teaching with your heart thing, that's misguided, because your head's pretty darn important too. I mean, this is about teaching and learning. It's about education, and we need to keep that kind of logistical sense open. Okay, make decisions with your head. Let your heart kind of tell you which way you're going and what that's going to do, but you have to be critical of those decisions and leading from an emotional place. So I appreciate everyone joining me today in a beautiful Ohio. I apologize that this video isn't from the freeway. Hopefully the sound and the vibration and the shaking's a little bit better because I'm not on the freeway. It's way easier to do this at low speed, I've learned. That's a really pretty house. I've never noticed that. So, until next time, everyone be safe, enjoy teaching, and I will see you on the next TFT on 2 wheels.